Hello everyone, my name is Shruti Sharma and in this year in the Civil Services examination I got AIR 1. Today I'm having a session regarding mainly answer writing as to how I approached answer writing in my general studies papers. I got a total of 494 marks in my general studies papers, and there were a few things that I tried to do before the examination in terms of preparing a strategy for it, preparing some content for it. So I'm going to try to share what I did during this time. As to how this session is going to be structured, firstly I'll talk about certain basic things that you can apply in all 4 papers, and then we're going to go paper wise, where GS1 certain questions will be seen, and I'm going to try to pick up a few questions from this year's mains examination, and we'll see as to how they can be tackled. First GS1, then 2, then 3 and 4. So without further ado, let me jump straight into it. Firstly is understanding the basics of answer writing. So there are a few things which I think are important. Firstly is the idea of understanding the question. Understanding the question, I feel if you just understand the question to a certain extent and only answer what is being asked of you, then more than half or at least half your work is done. Because sometimes, especially at the very beginning of our preparation, we just see certain keywords in the question and answer whatever we know of that specific topic. And that's in that process somewhere, the point of the question we forget, and midway through it, we start writing anything and everything, and by the conclusion, what you're writing is completely different from what is being asked in the question. So make sure that you have the question always in mind, break it up into certain parts, underline keywords in the question. Sometimes you can divide it into A and B parts, sometimes you can write it in paragraph form or in point form, but based on what the question is demanding. Secondly, in corollary to this, and I think if you understand the question also, coherence in the question, in the answer writing also comes, because some people have this I think needless debate on whether you should write in paragraphs or whether you should write in points. I feel as long as you're able to express a good number of points and in a good flow with maximum coherence. Point making does not mean that the examiner is not able to understand what you're writing. So coherence is very, very important. So for example, with respect to this first point, there was this question in GS3 this year about blue LEDs, about a Nobel Prize which had been given to the discovery of blue LEDs in the 1990s. But if, for example, you completely do not answer the question and answer whatever you know about LEDs, the point of the question completely goes away, and it's very likely that you'll get very less marks. Even if you know whatever limited information about blue LEDs, try to shape your current knowledge according to what is being asked. So try to write about blue LEDs and what you think they are and how they can, help us in daily life. So this is understanding the question. With respect to, again, flow, legibility and coherence, you can choose whatever you like, are more comfortable with, whether it's paragraph or it's points. I personally was more comfortable with points, so I chose that because I felt I could include more dimensions in it. But the flow should not be hampered at any point. Second is again a very, very important part in answer writing and a balance that many people find very difficult to sort of balance: speed versus content. And I think no part of this should be neglected. If you're, for example, you have good handwriting speed, you can complete all your 20 questions, but you don't have the necessary content, there's no point in it. Similarly, if you have the content and you're writing, say, the first 5 answers really nicely with a lot of good content, good handwriting, good pictures, but you're leaving the last 5 questions or leaving the last 3-4 questions, then you won't get the desired marks that you want. So a balance between both speed and content is required. You need to understand that content building happens before you enter the examination hall. So make sure that you have good content ready with you. And how will you have good content ready with you? You need to keep in mind the syllabus, you need to keep in mind the previous year question papers, and have at least 1 or 2 pages of information and content based on the syllabus that you have. And keywords are mentioned in the syllabus, which you should definitely work on. And here, in terms of content, I think, say for example, GS3 paper this time, there were a lot of questions which most of us did not know who attempted the paper. But at the same time, we know that there are certain low-hanging fruits which you do prepare even in GS3 you can get sort of good marks in those questions. So for example, in GS1 there are social issues, clear-cut mention of topics in the syllabus which do come. So for example, population, urbanization, women's issues, you can at least prepare 1 or 2 pages of notes. Similarly for GS3, questions on internal security. 4 questions definitely, 3 to 4 questions definitely come on internal security, and you can definitely answer them if you have good notes prepared, and that won't take too much time. So the effort you put in internal security versus the reward that you will get in GS3 are very, very commensurate, right? So identify those areas where you can build good content, and that will help you. Similarly, cyber security. Similarly, say in GS3 there's food processing, in GS2 there's governance related issues, NGOs, SHGs. Questions from those topics come necessarily 1 or 2 each year. So prepare good content on them. Apart from that also, focus on building good content which you can use in your answers. At the same time, practice for good speed. If you have good content, doesn't mean that you can translate it into speed unless and until you practice answer writing. So for speed, the only thing that I would suggest to you is do answer writing. Even in the 3-hour paper, make certain internal sort of limits on yourself. Put certain internal limits on yourself ki acha 1 ghante mein I'll complete these many questions, half an hour mein these many questions, and stick to it, right? So this is speed. Third, once you have speed, you have content, you have understood the question, then comes structuring of the question. And the structuring can be of 2 types. First is the content-based structuring, and the second is the spatial structuring, right? So in terms of content-based structuring, firstly, you know there's an introduction, there's a body, there's a conclusion. So this is usually the structure we follow in terms of how we plan out our answer. Sometimes this can, change a little bit, that's completely fine, but usually you should have a 2-3 line introduction, then followed by a body with a certain number of points, or even if you're not writing in point form, but there should be a certain amount of matter or more than 1 dimension only that you're looking at. So the more the dimensions you have in your answer, the more it's likely to fetch you more marks, right? And then you have a conclusion which can be forward looking, which can include good terms, it can include good examples, it can include a way forward in terms of suggestions. So all of that you can work on. Again, in terms of content, you should always go back to what the question is asking, and therefore divide your main question into say 2 parts or 3 parts. If it has 3 parts, the question, divide it into 3 parts and answer accordingly, right? So this is for content structuring. For spatial structuring, I think you need to understand that this is the page which has been given to you, to utilize it to the maximum possible. And sometimes people say that I don't have good handwriting, how do I then fetch good marks, the examiner will not want to read my copies. But the most you can do out of it is, for example, if this is the question which is answered here, start writing here, then underline keywords to get the attention of the examiner. Then you can, this is the first, say the first part of the question is here, so you start writing it here. Then within it, you start writing points here, right? And then if there's a further sub point to it, you start writing it here. So in terms of spatial structuring, you can start from here, then leave a margin, write points here, then for sub points you can write it here. For examples, if I had to write, I use a triangle. For points, if I had to write, I like to use like circles. So these are little things you can do in terms of making your answer look more, utilizing the space which has been given to you in that one page. So that is in terms of structuring. Then we come to the 4th point, which is embellishments, which is like I call embellishments in terms of like you're adding things to your answer. Apart, so there are certain people who follow all of these 3 things, still they're not getting the adequate amount of marks to make the top ranks or make a good cut in terms of mains examination. So what I think helped me this time around, and I tried to work on it, was working on adding additional things. So it could include examples, which I personally sort of used to scour out the newspaper for, certain examples which I could use according to the syllabus in each paper. Then committee names in say GS2 paper, or data in GS3, in economy, in environment. Then certain government reports are there, so economic survey, you can cite that this is something that the economic survey said in GS3. Similarly, you can talk about any key terms that you can find. So anything which adds to the answer in terms of examples, in terms of, and also in terms of diagrams and maps, especially in say GS1 in geography, you can use that. I used some maps in history as well. So anything that you can, flow charts in GS3. So have a ready collection of them. If you don't have, you can, there are certain materials you can access, or a certain corpus copies or collections that other people have given. So try to add stuff if all of this work has been done. So remember that embellishments, you can't like just start by adding embellishments only, and that won't add content to your answer. Make sure that your basics are strong, your content is strong, your structuring is fine, your speed is fine, and then focus on adding the extra marks fetching things that will make your copy stand apart from the previous person, right? And then based on all of these 4 things, what you have to do is you have to practice. Practice means if you're doing practice at home, writing a few answers every day, that is fine. If you're showing it to someone else, that is fine. If you're enrolled in a test series, attempt those test series rigorously, attempt those test series within the fixed time limit, set those time limits upon yourself. Once you've written, then analyze your performance. In terms of that, analysis can be done, whatever feedback you've been given by the mentor, by whoever has checked your copy. If you're showing to a friend who has written the examination and can give you some advice, he or she can analyze the copy. You yourself can analyze your copy based on the model answer that has been given to you, based on any other material that you find on the internet. But that analysis should be done very judiciously. You need not take every advice that you get. You need not add every single point that you get. You need to prioritize the points. Even when you're writing points in any of the 4 papers, I think it's important to write the best point the first, because sometimes there are 10 points you can write in an answer. You don't have the time, you don't have the space for all of that. So write the best answer, best point first, and then accordingly, according to importance. And by the end, by chance, if you don't have enough time left, you can leave out the other points. But if you leave the good point for the end, then it's most likely that you won't get adequate amount of marks, right? So analyze what you have to do, analyze your loopholes, analyze based on all these parameters where you're lacking, work on it, and then most importantly, just don't don't do answer writing randomly, but try to improve. So the next paper that you're writing based on this analysis, make sure before you're sitting down for writing the next paper that in this paper specifically, I will make sure that I will write an introduction like this. If I get a question on social issues based on, say, secularism, this is something that I will use in the introduction. Last time I did not, write enough points. I will make sure that I write at least 7 points in a 10 marker. Something like that. So make those targets for yourself and make sure that you improve the next time you write, and you're not writing the same thing again and again and not improving. So this is the basics, I feel, for all 4 papers that you need to follow. Now I'm going to talk about specific papers and what you can do in each paper and how I went about it, right? So now we come to GS1. GS1 mein first is history, right? History in terms of content, you would already have worked upon, say you would have gone through your spectrum, you'd gone through your whatever books that you've gone through during a prelims preparation, or if you're not doing that. Again, I'd like to say that for people who are giving the mains this time, well and good, you consolidate your material and use or whatever tips that you can from this point. But people who are not giving their mains this time and who have their mains say next year or the year after that, make sure that you're doing all of this content building at least from now on, because you know what makes a good answer, and these content building does not happen in a day. So make sure that you're adding those examples, those committees, those quotes, and all those embellishments I talked about in the very beginning. Anyway, so history, we were talking about any history questions. Again, you'll have an introduction, you'll have a body, you'll have a conclusion. Now people often ask, what do you write in a history question? Because sometimes, say in GS2 and GS3, you can write committees, you can write data, but say history, a question is asked about the repercussions of the Nehru report of 1828, and I remember answering a question about the Nehru report of Nehru report was a bunch of uneasy compromises between A and B. Or say if we pick up 2 questions this time from the GS paper, GS1 paper 2021. First question was evaluate, so I'm going to just read it out. Evaluate the nature of Bhakti literature and its contribution to Indian culture. And then the second question was regarding social religious reform and its impact. The point that I'm trying to make is that how do you approach these questions, and how do you answer them? So firstly, I believe in introduction, an easy thing that you can probably do if you say don't have a history background or you think how to make a history introductions, you can start with talking about details of the question. You can mention years, you can mention say key figures. So if the question is asked about Delhi Sultanate, something about the Delhi Sultanate, its cultural history, or something about a particular maritime history or something like that, you can just start simply, rather than getting too bogged down by the question. You can just start by saying the Delhi Sultanate was from this to this period, key representations of this being the ABC rulers, right? So you can start with that, or say the Nehru report question that I talked about. So you can just mention that the Nehru report was compiled or made in 1928 by Motilal Nehru, headed by Motilal Nehru, in response to a challenge by there was this particular viceroy, I can't remember right now, right? So just start with these certain details, so it gives a nice sort of beginning to the answer. Similarly, for this question, evaluate the nature of Bhakti literature and its contribution to Indian culture. So I personally started, and these are certain things that you can prepare also beforehand. So I started, I think, remember, with the word Bhakti, or the word Bhakti comes from the root word bhaj, meaning to participate in the divine, a movement that began in South India in the 6th to 7th centuries, right? So this can be a starting point. Similarly, for the socio-religious reform movement, and if you look at previous year question papers, it's a question that is repeated often. So I had started something regarding, I don't remember the exact thing, but I used the word Bengal Renaissance in it, and I used key figures of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar in the introduction itself in one line, right? So these are certain things in terms of details, years, key figures, which can make your introduction nice and simple. You don't have to think too much about introduction in history, right? So this what becomes the introduction. Then what is the body of this question? So evaluate the nature. So this is not just asking about bhakti tradition. So again, coming back to what I had talked about in the beginning, understand the question. First part of the question is evaluate the nature of Bhakti literature and its contribution to Indian culture. So you can clearly identify there are two parts of the question. First is understanding the nature, and you have to evaluate it, and the second is contributions. You begin with your introduction in terms of, say, this is blah, 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 it started at this period. Then you have to talk about, so again, in terms of making your answer better, what I did was, and this is something that I had practiced before in one of the test series answers as well, I made a map. Oh God, I've gotten out of the practice of making a map, but again, these things also you can practice making world maps, practice making Indian maps, so that you can make it quickly, right? So then I plotted down certain things. So here, for example, I'll just say Lal Ded, and then whatever, and then I'll sort of put here Mirabai. Here I'll put Kabir Granthavali. Here I'll put, say, Geeta Govind, and all of that, right? So I used to jot everything down. So what you're talking about is in one small thing, you're not talking about Bhakti literature, because that's not necessarily the nature of the question, but you're just plotting as to what all are the Bhakti literature in India. So in a very small space, you're talking about a certain part of the question. Then, so introduction, side mein this, then first part, nature of Bhakti literature, and then you can jot down points 1, 2. So what can be the nature of Bhakti literature? This is not asking what Bhakti literature was, but the nature of Bhakti literature. So you can talk about devotional in nature, right? Devotional nature, then you give certain example of, say, Mirabai or say Shankaracharya. So one thing that I tried to do in my answers was, when I was giving a point, I used to write that point and then tell you why that point I'm writing, right? So give an explanation or justification of what that was. So first, the nature was, it was devotional in nature. Example, this person. Secondly, say, what can be the nature of Bhakti literature? It was, say, in simple language. So it could be easily sort of recited. So you can give why it was simple, this thing, and then give an example of, give an example. I'll just, fine. Give an example of, say, the Alvars and Nayanars and this thing, they were relatively simple. Then thirdly, you can write about how they were in regional and vernacular languages. So this can be a nature of this thing, right? So this is the first part of the question. Then you can talk about its contribution. So this is the second part of the question. So give equal weightage to both, right? So then you talk about the contribution in terms of, say, and remember that, you know, I am right now making it like this, but this is going to be your page. So this is the question. You start writing here. This will be the intro, where you wrote whatever. Here I drew a map, so this will be the map. Here you start writing about nature. So this is point 1, example, point 2, example, similarly point 3, example. By chance you're done with this page, then you go to the next page because it's a 2-marker, then you talk about the contribution, right? So contribution you can write about, say, it led to development of bhakti temple tradition, say, right? Because this happened. Then development of, say, then again example how, if you can, then culture of this thing, sainthood and challenge to Brahmanical Hinduism can be one. Then say in terms of vernacular, so we talked about the role of vernacular. So contribution can be development of vernacular languages across India and development of regional cultures overall. So the Bhakti tradition would lead to development of regional culture. So make sure that each point is a little different. Don't repeat points. Keep thinking of new ways in which you can approach it. And sometimes these are questions which you may not have like prepared beforehand. So try to think a little in that time period and make sure certain questions are different. And then you end with this conclusion in terms of the impact of Bhakti on India, or how the impact of the Sufis, and link it to a further sort of thing. So in terms of conclusion, I usually used, so we talked about intro, we talked about body. In terms of conclusion, what you can do in history is link it with the next period. If you can't think of something else, make it forward looking. If you're talking about world history, you can link it to India. If you're talking, say, if you're talking about the Cold War and the question is something like that, you can link it to India. Or you can, if you're talking about the Cold War, talk about the post-Cold War period in the conclusion, and try to link the question with the Cold War with what happened later, right? So link it with, make it forward looking, make it, if it's world history, you can make it about India. Another way is linking it with the next period. Sometimes you can link it with post-modern India. So if you're talking about pre-British India, link it with what happened there to what happened post-independence, link it with constitutional values. So something about Mahatma Gandhi and non-cooperation, link it about how that laid the basis for the constitution that was made, the makers of modern India, right? So these are certain things that I think you can use in a history question. Two questions one question we talked about, the second question, social religious reform. Again, these are things that you can prepare. And I already talked about what can be the introduction for such questions. In terms of answering such a question, make sure that you have multiple dimensions and make sure you put a lot of data, whatever you've read in Spectrum. You don't need to go through a lot of books, Spectrum or any other sort of coaching material that you're using. Just stick to whatever you've done with that. Just keep on revising whatever you've read before the prelims, right? So this was history. Next we come to geography in GS1. Geography was never my strong point. I did the basic minimum. I just did the 11th and 12th NCRTs mainly for it. Sometimes just going through other books to look at examples or recent monthly or yearly compilations for any recent things that may have happened in geography. But again, I decided to make sure that for the introduction here, I mainly use definitions because I didn't have too much to use. For the body, again, what was being answered, a direct answer to that I tried to use maps in this. I tried to use diagrams. If I had, if there was a possibility to make a map or a diagram in a geography question, I would not leave it. So if at this time there was this question on, there were two questions in terms of physical geography, which I've just mentioned. So there were more questions. First was differentiate causes of landslides in the Himalayan region and Western Ghats. So the question was landslides. And if you have good content developed on landslides, which is a very normal question, comes in disaster management also, comes in GS1 also, then you won't have too much problem. This question will not take too much time, and then you can move on to next more challenging questions. To make sure you have good content on questions that are like easy, right? So this was an easy question relatively in geography. You just start with what? You just start with a basic introduction of landslides, or what you can do is, I had a certain data on landslides as well. So I just started with, say, GSI, according to GSI, 12.6% of the land area of India is prone to landslides. And I had this like very rigorously burnt into my head because I had prepared this and had written certain questions like this, right? So this is the introduction that you follow in terms of you can use certain data. Then I drew a diagram again of a map again of India. I circled basically this place, which was basically the Himalayas, and then I underlined or shaded this place, which was the Western Ghats. And then I wrote reasons for both here and here. I think this is something that I did in one of my papers as well, and then I think later here also. Or sometimes you can just draw, say this is 1 and this is 2, and then you can write it later. So if you make a chota sa map side mein, and you think you can't write uske aaspas, तो just mark 1, mark 2, and then write 1 के नीचे इसके reasons and 2 के नीचे इसके reasons यहाँ पर. So this is something that you can do in terms of structuring as well. So differentiate causes of landslides in Himalayan region, Western Ghats, talk about both. And if it's talking about just causes, if this is only the question and it's a 10 marker, make sure that causes occupy a major part of your answer, but at the same time don't just leave it there. To make it a slightly better answer, also talk about solutions, right? If only the causes are answered, it will be an incomplete answer if you only write about the causes, even if it's the only thing which is answered in the question. Little bit, at least half a page, write about certain solutions. Here you can mention again differences. So Western Ghats here and Himalayas here, and different approaches that can be followed. So I remember in the Himalayas, there was a separate committee called Deepak Chopra committee. So mention that here. Right? In the Western Ghats, there was this committee called Kasturi Rangan committee. So mention these names, they'll fetch you sort of extra, that it'll show you have some sort of knowledge about both these areas and how their problems are different. So talk about certain solutions in terms of mitigation, general guidelines, whatever you're saying, try to back something, back it with something, whether it's a committee, whether it's certain guidelines that you think are there. So NDMA guidelines, certain schemes by the government. So there's this landslide susceptibility mapping in the northeast. So talk about that with respect to the Himalayas. So these are certain things with respect to the question, demand of the question, you can do. Okay, so this was geography. Similarly, there was this question on IT industries this time around only. So IT industries, it was talking about socio-economic implications. Right? So although the question was about socio-economic implications, I drew after the introduction, I think I talked about the importance of the service industry and how the IT industry, service sector in India with respect to the global world, and how the IT industries are at the central focal point of it. Then I drew again a small map here, and I drew the IT industries. This is a bad map, but basically you understand, I just jotted down the IT industries within the map, that's it, nothing else I talked about it. Then I moved towards the part of the question where it was asking about the socio-economic implications. So then I talked about, say, the implications in terms of migration, because it was socio-economic implications. Remember, keywords of the question, it was not just asking about economic implications. So socio-economic means development of slums, development of certain industries, cluster of industries, development or issues of out-migration, in-migration, female sex ratio in the areas of out-migration, then basic lots of other things that I can't think of right now, but socio-economic implications, make sure that you're answering what is being asked in the questions, right? So these are the two types of questions that can be answered in geography: physical geography and mineral or human geography. Third is social issues, and social issues I feel if you work on a little before the mains, I think it can be very helpful. And here this is a part of the question, a part of the paper apart from GS4 and essay, which you can be a little creative with, because the questions are also a little creative. One thing that you need to focus on, and which can fetch you more marks, is dimensions. as many dimensions you open in this answer, because they're sometimes quite open-ended, sometimes they're not, but the questions that are open-ended, if you open as many dimensions as possible, it is likely to be a good answer. Similarly, for intros and conclusions, I had certain ready templates. So for example, if it would be secularism, I had, say, Sarvadharma Sambhav or the 12th Rocky Edict of Ashoka, or something else that I would either use in the introduction or the conclusion. Communalism, something else. Diversity, I remember I had written down thali, the concept of India as a thali as compared to, say, melting pot or salad bowl model. So this is something that I used. So thali model for diversity. Then similarly for population, there's a unit. Urbanization, there's a unit. So urbanization, I had good data points on different aspects of urbanization, different sub points which I could use in a question on urbanization. For that I had prepared matter already. For population, I remember a good conclusion that I had already prepared, which I used in this year's paper, was also about how education is the best contraceptive. And there was this Sucheta Srivastav judgment which talked about reproductive choice in the context of the population debate and population control debate that was happening. So these are things that you can work on already. There are some 10 different subheadings. Make sure that you have good content on them. Make sure that in the final paper you're trying to look at various dimensions. So if there's a question on, I remember last time or in this paper there was this question about social values and influence of foreign cultures on India and India on foreign cultures, right? So you can only write 1 and 2 points about it and explain it a lot, or you can write points in terms of, say, language, then dress, then art and all of that, and don't just write it like that. Try to give examples of how these things are there. Similarly, globalization is a topic. So global in local and local in global. How does globalization affect local cultures and how do local cultures affect globalization? There are a lot of questions which are asked on globalization year after year. So make sure that you just sit down one day and think of things that are there. So for example, something like PUBG was there, and PUBG there was this Indian version which was Fauji, right? And something like Kaun Banega Crorepati. So Slumdog Millionaire and Who Wants to Become a Millionaire was the inspiration story behind KB. So these are ways in which globalization is affecting Indian culture, and it's how it's also shaping in foreign culture as well. So something like sitar music. So Anushka Shankar has taken the sitar outside to foreign worlds to the extent that pop culture outside is being influenced by fusion music. So think of these examples, sit down and prepare certain topics for social issues which can make your answer a little more interesting and different from the other person. So this was GS1.